This story is titled, "My Mom and Dad Showered My Golden Sister's Children with Love and Gifts while barely acknowledging my kids as their grandchildren. But after what I did, they suddenly want to spend time with my children. Too bad I've forbidden it." Hey Reddit, I'm a 38-year-old father of two wonderful children, and I finally hit my limit with my parents. For years, I've been watching them blatantly favor my siblings' kids over mine, and I don't think I can let it slide anymore. I used to tell myself I was just imagining things or that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, but at this point, the evidence is too overwhelming to ignore. This has been happening for a long time, but it became painfully obvious when my oldest son turned 10. Every year, my kids get small, almost thoughtless birthday gifts from my parents. One year, my son got a book that was clearly from the bargain section of a store. Another time, my daughter received a generic stuffed animal that still had a clearance sticker on it. Meanwhile, my brother's kids and my sister's kids get things like new gaming consoles, brand-name clothes, and expensive bikes. At first, I tried to justify their behavior. Maybe they just happened to find better gifts for the others. Maybe they forgot to get something for my kids and just picked up whatever they could at the last minute. But when it kept happening year after year, it became clear this wasn't a coincidence. The worst of it happened last Christmas. My wife and I always tried to make holidays special for our kids, but Christmas with my parents had become something I dreaded. That year, when it was time for the grandkids to open presents, my kids excitedly unwrapped theirs. I saw my son's face fall immediately when he discovered a plastic toy set, something clearly from a dollar store. My daughter got a generic puzzle. I looked over at my nephews and nieces, all shrieking in excitement as they unwrapped expensive electronics, designer shoes, and gift cards worth hundreds of dollars. The moment that broke me was when my 10-year-old son turned to me, confused, and asked, "Why doesn't Santa like me as much?" After that, I confronted my parents. I didn't even try to be polite about it. I just asked them straight out why they always gave my kids cheap, meaningless gifts while my siblings' children got expensive, well-thought-out ones. My mother immediately waved it off, saying I was overreacting and they just happened to see something nice for the others. My father didn't even bother to come up with an excuse. He just said, "You're reading too much into it." My wife, who had been biting her tongue for years, finally refused to keep quiet. She told them that it was disgusting to treat grandkids unequally, and that if they couldn't even pretend to care about our children, maybe we should stop showing up altogether. My mother gasped like she was the victim, while my dad just sighed and muttered, "Don't be dramatic." That's when I started really thinking about it. This wasn't new behavior. My parents had always favored my siblings growing up. I was never the golden child, and I told myself that was fine, but I never expected that favoritism to extend to our children. Somehow, it felt worse now. My kids were innocent. Watching them get treated like second-class family members felt like a new kind of betrayal. The final straw came a few weeks ago. My sister casually mentioned that our parents were taking all the grandkids to Disneyland. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. My kids weren't invited. I called my mother immediately, demanding to know why my children had been left out. She acted confused at first, but when I pressed her, she finally said, "We didn't think your kids would be interested." That was a blatant lie. We had taken our kids to Disneyland before, and they had loved it. Even if they hadn't, what kind of grandparent assumes their grandchildren wouldn't be interested in a theme park and just doesn't invite them? I was furious, and my wife was livid. When I brought it up to my siblings expecting some kind of support, they shrugged it off. My brother said, "Mom and Dad are just closer to our kids because they see them more." My sister told me, "You're making too big of a deal out of this." That was it for my wife. She said she was done and told me we needed to step back. Honestly, I agreed. I told my parents that until they started treating my kids equally, we wouldn't be attending any more family gatherings. My mother acted shocked, kept repeating that I was overreacting. My dad just texted me later saying I needed to stop making problems and grow up. I didn't respond. Now my kids are starting to notice. They've asked me why their grandparents don't seem to like them. My son, who is way too observant for his age, pointed out that every time we visit, his cousins get hugs and doting attention, while he and his sister barely get a greeting. I don't know what to tell them. I don't want to lie, but I also don't want them to feel like they aren't good enough. Out of frustration, I vented online about how favoritism in families can be so damaging. I didn't expect much to come from it, but a few days later I got a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a while. She told me she'd noticed the favoritism too, but had been too afraid to say anything. She even said that when she was younger, she always felt like my parents treated her worse than my siblings. I don't know what I expected to happen, but hearing that made it all feel even more real. It wasn't just me. It wasn't in my head. I think I already know what I need to do, but it's hard to accept. Cutting off my parents feels drastic, but what choice do I have? I can't keep putting my kids in situations where they're made to feel less than. If my parents don't care enough to change, I need to start caring enough to walk away. A few days after everything blew up, my phone started lighting up non-stop. First, it was my mother, then my sister, then my brother. Calls, texts, voicemails, one after another. I ignored them at first, but when my mother kept calling back to back, I finally answered. The second I picked up, she was already yelling. She accused me of airing private family matters and making her and my father look like bad grandparents. She kept saying I was exaggerating and twisting things, that my kids weren't being treated unfairly, and that I was overreacting. When I brought up the Disneyland trip, she brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that my kids wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. I hung up. That set off my siblings. My sister messaged me first, saying I was stirring up drama for no reason and making their kids feel bad. My brother followed soon after, telling me I was making things worse and that I should just let it go before I caused permanent damage to the family. They kept insisting our parents had done nothing wrong, that I was blowing things out of proportion and that I was making things awkward for everyone. I didn't reply. Then something I didn't expect happened. I started getting messages from extended family. A few cousins reached out, telling me they had noticed the favoritism for years but never said anything. One even admitted they had experienced the same treatment when they were younger but had assumed it was just them. Another cousin dropped a bombshell. He told me my parents had been planning the Disneyland trip for months and had deliberately excluded my kids. They hadn't forgotten or assumed my kids wouldn't be interested. They had decided from the start that my children weren't invited. When I confronted my mother again, she immediately went into victim mode. She kept repeating that I was trying to turn the family against them and making her look bad. She even had the nerve to say I was hurting my kids more by making this into a big issue. My wife didn't hesitate. She told me she was done. She didn't want our children around my parents anymore. She didn't want them growing up feeling like they weren't good enough. And honestly, I agreed. There was nothing left to say. My brother tried one last time to mediate. He told me to let it go, that this wasn't worth breaking the family over. I asked him if he would let his own kids be treated this way. He didn't answer. Then my father sent his ultimatum. He said, "Either you apologize or we won't be seeing you or your kids for a while." I replied, "Fine." I thought that would be the end of it, but my parents weren't done. I found out later that they had told my nieces and nephews that my kids didn't want to come to Disneyland. They tried to twist the story so that my children looked like the ones who didn't want to be involved. When I called them to demand an explanation, I found out they had already blocked me. That was it. That was the final straw. My kids started noticing. My son asked me why his grandparents didn't visit anymore. I didn't know how to explain it to him without making it sound worse. I just told him that sometimes people don't treat others fairly, and when that happens, you have to walk away. Some family members took my side. Others said I was overreacting. The divide was clear. My parents' golden children, my brother and sister, stayed firmly in their corner. A few aunts and cousins supported me quietly, but no one wanted to get too involved. Then out of nowhere, I got a message from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in a long time. She simply wrote, "You're not crazy. Your parents have always treated you differently." That was all I needed to know. I told my wife we were done. Unless my parents could acknowledge what they did and actually change, there was no going back. My kids deserved better. I wasn't going to let them grow up feeling unwanted in their own family. A few weeks passed, and my parents stopped pretending altogether. They weren't just playing favorites behind closed doors anymore. They were openly excluding my family from everything. Invitations to family gatherings stopped completely. Events that we would have normally been included in were now happening without us, and no one even bothered to let us know. Then I heard about the wedding. One of my cousins was getting married. I wasn't expecting an invitation at that point, but what I wasn't prepared for was how deliberate the exclusion was. My parents had gone out of their way to make sure we weren't invited. A different cousin, one who had been quietly supportive, called me one night. She let it slip that my parents had personally told my siblings to make sure that my wife, my kids, and I were not included in any of the wedding plans. They had told people that I was the one who cut them off and that my children didn't want to be around them. It was the exact opposite of what had actually happened. More relatives started noticing. A few aunts and uncles admitted in private that they could see what was happening. They told me they didn't agree with it, but they also didn't want to get involved. They weren't going to take sides. Then the Disneyland trip finally happened. I wasn't even thinking about it anymore until I saw the photos. My parents, my siblings, all their kids except mine. But that wasn't even the worst part. In the pictures, standing right next to my mother were two kids I didn't recognize, a family friend's children. They had invited someone else's kids instead of mine. I didn't even know what to say. When my son saw the pictures, he looked at them for a long time, then just asked, "Why didn't Grandma take me too?" I had no answer. That was when my wife was fully done. She told me this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was punishment. My parents weren't just playing favorites. They were making a point to erase my children from their lives. She told me she didn't want our kids to keep waiting for love that was never coming, and I agreed. Then another relative reached out with something even worse. One of my aunts told me that my parents had been telling people that I was the reason they didn't see my kids. According to them, I was the one keeping the grandchildren away. They were playing the victim, making it sound like they desperately wanted to see my kids, but that I was being spiteful and stopping them. I wasn't even surprised. I messaged my mother one last time. I didn't want anything from her. I just wanted to see if she'd own up to it. I told her I knew everything, that I knew about the lies, about how they had gone out of their way to exclude my kids, and that I was done. Her response: "We just have a different bond with the other grandkids." That was it. No denial, no apology, just confirmation of what I already knew. After that, my siblings stopped reaching out too. My brother, who had been insisting I was making a big deal out of nothing, suddenly had nothing to say. My sister, who had been defending my parents at every turn, went silent. They had chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. Then the final wave of pain hit. My parents blocked me on everything. My mother, my father, even my sister. My brother didn't block me, but he wasn't responding to anything either. They had completely cut us off, but not before making sure everyone else believed their version of the story. Then, out of nowhere, my sister's husband messaged me. He kept it short. He told me that he saw what was happening and that he agreed with me, but that he couldn't say anything. He said it would cause problems if he took my side openly, but that I wasn't crazy, and that I wasn't imagining things. I didn't even bother responding. At this point, what was the point? After that, my kids were completely erased from my parents' lives. No birthday calls, no Christmas presents, not even a half-hearted attempt at reaching out. My children no longer existed to them. Then my father sent his final message. "If you ever decide to stop being selfish, maybe we can talk." I didn't respond. I realized something then. My children weren't missing out. They weren't the ones who had lost something. I was. I had spent my whole life chasing after my parents' approval, hoping things would change. And for what? To watch my kids get the same treatment I got growing up? No. My kids deserved better. They deserved to grow up knowing they were loved without having to fight for it. So I focused on them. My parents had made their choice. Now I was making mine. A few weeks passed and my parents made their stance even clearer. They started posting more and more family pictures online, making sure to highlight every gathering, every celebration, every trip with all the grandkids except mine. It wasn't subtle. They wanted people to see how close they were with my brother and sister's families, while my wife, my kids, and I were completely erased. I ignored it at first, but then something unexpected happened. One of my aunts called them out in the family group chat. She wasn't someone I had ever been particularly close with, but out of nowhere, she asked why my children were never included in any family events. She pointed out the obvious, that there were always pictures of my nephews and nieces, but never a single mention of my kids. My mother responded almost immediately, saying they treat all grandkids the same and that they love all of them equally. My father jumped in, saying I was the one who distanced myself, and that if my kids weren't around, it was because of my own actions. I had planned to stay quiet, but before I could even say anything, a cousin sent me a private message. They had a recording. It was from a conversation they had with my mother just days earlier. In the recording, my mother said, "It's just easier to be around the other grandkids. We actually like them." I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful for the proof. I sent the recording straight to my parents, asking if this was really how they felt about my kids. My mother took almost an hour to reply. When she did, she tried to brush it off, saying, "You know how I joke around." My father, on the other hand, didn't even pretend to be apologetic. He simply responded, "You were always too sensitive. We do not owe your kids anything." That was all I needed to hear. My siblings, as expected, said nothing. My brother, who had always insisted I was overreacting, ignored the whole thing. My sister, who had defended my parents at every turn, suddenly had nothing to say. Then the next betrayal hit. I was scrolling through social media when I saw it. Pictures from a family vacation. My parents, my siblings, all their kids enjoying a week-long trip to Hawaii. They hadn't just excluded my children from family gatherings. They had taken every other grandchild on a luxury vacation and hadn't even told us. The worst part was when my son saw the pictures. He stared at them for a long time before turning to me and asking, "Did Grandma forget about us?" I had no answer. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from my brother's wife. She told me she didn't agree with what was happening, but that she didn't want to create tension. She said she knew it was unfair, but that it's just the way things are. That was the moment I realized nothing was going to change. My parents weren't going to suddenly see the error of their ways. My siblings weren't going to stand up for what was right. No one was going to fix this. Then my parents went back to rewriting the story. They started telling extended family that I was the one keeping my kids away, that I was bitter and holding a grudge for no reason. They made themselves out to be the victims, saying they tried everything, but that I was the one who refused to let my kids have a relationship with them. I didn't even have to argue. I just sent the recording in a private family chat. Some relatives were shocked. A few messaged me apologizing for not seeing it sooner. Others, including a couple of aunts and uncles, said I should have handled it privately. But there was no denying it anymore. My parents weren't misunderstood. They weren't making mistakes. They had made a choice. Then came the final message. "If you really loved us, you wouldn't be doing this." I didn't respond. I talked it over with my wife that night, and we both agreed this was it. There was no salvaging this relationship, no future where we tried to mend things just so my children could be treated as second-class family members. My parents had made their choice. Now, we were making ours. My kids would never again have to wonder why their grandparents didn't love them, because from now on, they wouldn't be part of their lives at all. Not long after I made the decision to cut my parents out for good, They retaliated. My wife and I woke up one morning to find that we had both been removed from the extended family group chat. It was clear my parents had made the decision, and my siblings had gone along with it. A few hours later, we realized we had also been blocked by them on social media. There was no grand announcement, no final argument, just a quiet but obvious message. A few days later, I found out through a cousin that my parents had hosted a family reunion. Everyone had been invited except us. It wasn't just a casual get-together. It was a huge gathering with relatives flying in from out of town. Pictures started showing up online, everyone smiling and laughing like nothing was wrong. My siblings were there with their kids, and once again, my parents had made it clear that my family wasn't part of theirs. Then something unexpected happened. The aunt who had called them out before decided she wasn't going to be part of it. She refused to attend the reunion and made it known that if my family wasn't welcome, she wouldn't be going either. It wasn't a loud protest, but it sent a message. She was one of the only people who had actually taken a stand. Then the letter arrived. It was from my father, handwritten, sent through the mail. I opened it already, knowing it wasn't going to be anything good. It was exactly what I expected. My father wrote that until I apologized and took responsibility for tearing the family apart. I was dead to them. He made it clear that as far as he was concerned, I had chosen this, and if I ever wanted to make things right, I knew what I had to do. I tossed the letter in the trash. Then my parents took things a step further. A package showed up for my kids. Inside were small gifts, nothing too expensive, but attached to each one was a note. The notes all had the same message. We love you and miss you even if your father is keeping you away. My wife didn't even hesitate. She packed the gifts right back up and mailed them back. She wasn't going to let them manipulate our children, and neither was I. Then my brother's wife slipped up. She had always been careful about what she said to me, always trying to stay out of the conflict, but in a casual conversation she let something slip. My mother had told her that she didn't consider my kids her real grandkids because they didn't spend enough time with her. She had said it like it was a simple fact, something that made perfect sense. That was when I realized just how deep the favoritism ran. It wasn't just that my parents liked my siblings' kids more. In their eyes, my children weren't even real family. And it wasn't just us who were being erased. My parents had been telling my nieces and nephews that I didn't want to be part of the family anymore. They were making it seem like I had chosen to walk away for no reason, leaving out every detail of what they had done. Then came the hard part. My son started asking questions. He had been quiet about everything, but one night he finally asked, "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Grandma and Grandpa don't like me?" I told him the truth. He had done nothing wrong. This wasn't about him. It was never about him. Then came another wedding, another invitation that never arrived. This time, it was another cousin. I didn't even expect to be invited at this point, but what got to me was the reason why. One of my relatives told me that the bride and groom had actually wanted to invite us, but my parents had told them it would cause awkwardness. At that point, my wife sat me down and told me I needed to consider therapy. She pointed out that I had been dealing with this treatment from my parents my entire life, and now I was watching them do it to my kids. She said that no matter how much I had tried to act like it didn't affect me, it clearly did. She was right. Then my parents sent one last message. It was more of the same, saying that I was making a mistake, that I was the one hurting my children by keeping them away, that if I really loved them, I would fix this. I blocked them. I blocked both of them permanently. After that, the ripple effect started. Some extended family members started distancing themselves from my parents. A few of them reached out to me saying they hadn't realized how bad it was. Others didn't say anything, but I noticed they weren't as quick to defend my parents anymore. I had spent so many years chasing after their approval, hoping things would change. Now, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anything. My focus was on my kids, on making sure they never had to feel like they weren't enough, on giving them the love they deserved. the love my parents should have given me. My parents had made their choice. Now I had made mine. After months of silence, my parents suddenly changed their approach. An email arrived in my inbox, long and carefully worded. At first glance, it looked like an apology. The first sentence read, "We miss you all so much." But as I kept reading, it became clear this wasn't an apology. There was no acknowledgement of anything they had done, no mention of the favoritism, the exclusion, or the manipulation. Instead, it was a carefully crafted message about how families should always come together and how life is too short for grudges. It was as if they expected me to sweep everything under the rug and pretend none of it had happened. Not long after, my siblings reached out. My brother sent a short message asking if I had thought about moving past this. My sister called my wife, casually suggesting that maybe it's time to move forward. Neither of them admitted any wrongdoing on our parents' part. They weren't asking how my kids were doing. They weren't offering any real reconciliation. They just wanted me to let it go. Something felt off. The timing was too convenient. Then one of my cousins filled in the blanks. Apparently, my parents' reputation had taken a hit. Several relatives had begun distancing themselves after hearing about what happened. The aunt who stood by me had told others why she no longer attended family events. A few other cousins had also pulled back, refusing to bring their kids around my parents. The family was starting to see the pattern, and my parents didn't like it. Then came the next attempt. They sent another email, this time with an offer. They wanted to make up for lost time by taking my kids on a trip. No mention of my wife or me, just my children. A chance for them to bond and start fresh. It wasn't hard to see what was really happening. This wasn't about making things right. They wanted my kids there so they could parade them around and act like everything was fine. My wife didn't even hesitate. She told me there was no way we were letting them use our children for damage control. I agreed. When that failed, they tried another route. My wife's parents called us, sounding confused. My parents had reached out to them, trying to get them to talk sense into us. They had painted the situation as a simple misunderstanding, claiming they had no idea why we were so upset and that they just wanted to reconnect as a family. My in-laws, thankfully, saw right through it. They told my parents that if they wanted a relationship, they needed to start by taking responsibility for their actions. That was the last they heard from them. Then my brother slipped up during a rare conversation. He let it slip that our parents had been planning for weeks to fix things before a big upcoming family event. The entire effort, the emails, the messages, the sudden outreach, wasn't about repairing relationships. It was about making the family look united before a major gathering where they didn't want people asking questions. I confronted him about it, and at first he tried to backtrack, but eventually he admitted it. Our parents weren't actually trying to change. They just didn't like how things looked to everyone else. That was it for me. Not long after, my parents sent another message inviting me to a family dinner. It was framed as a chance to talk things out. I didn't bother responding. Then my siblings started getting frustrated. My brother told me I was making things harder than they needed to be. My sister sent another message saying that at some point I needed to just let things go. They still didn't get it. They were still acting like this was a simple disagreement instead of years of neglect and exclusion. So I sent one final message. I told my parents that there would be no reconciliation unless they could acknowledge what they had done. No more pretending, no more rewriting history, just the truth. They never responded, and that was my answer. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to change. I wasn't hoping for some breakthrough or a moment of clarity from them. I wasn't expecting them to suddenly become the parents and grandparents they should have been. I was done, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt at peace. My focus was on my family, my real family, the one I was building with my wife and children, the one that was filled with love, not conditions. My parents had lost control, and I had never felt freer. The silence didn't last long. A cousin reached out, letting me know that my parents had gone full victim mode. They were telling anyone who would listen that I had abandoned the family and was keeping the grandkids away out of spite. The story they were pushing made them look like heartbroken grandparents unfairly cut off by an ungrateful son. Some relatives believed them, or at least didn't want to pick a side. Others had started seeing the pattern and were beginning to distance themselves from my parents. The division was clear. Some wanted to avoid conflict entirely, while others had no problem calling out what was really happening. Then something unexpected happened. One of my uncles openly confronted my father at a family gathering. He told him in front of others that he was the one ruining the family dynamic. He pointed out how my parents' treatment of my children was obvious to everyone and that they had no one to blame but themselves. My father stormed out of the conversation, furious that someone had dared to challenge him. The next blow came from my own sister. In a casual conversation, she let something slip. My mother had told her, "We do not see OP's kids as much because they are not as fun to be around." That was it. That was how my mother saw my children, not as family, not as grandkids she wanted to love, but as kids who weren't entertaining enough for her. Then my eldest son overheard a conversation between my wife and me. We had been careful about what we said around the kids, but that night he caught enough to put things together. He walked into the room and asked, "Do Grandma and Grandpa not like me?" My wife and I both froze. I told him the truth in the simplest way possible, that he had done nothing wrong, and that love should not be something he has to earn. He nodded but didn't say much after. The damage had already been done. Then came another email from my parents. This time it was another attempt at a reset. They claimed they wanted to start fresh and move forward as a family, but nowhere in the email did they acknowledge what had happened. No mention of the favoritism, the exclusion, or the way they had treated my kids like they didn't matter. They wanted to move on without addressing anything. I didn't bother replying. That was when they crossed another line. One afternoon, the school called. A package had been delivered to my children. Inside were letters from my parents and small gifts. The notes inside had the same manipulative messaging as before, telling my kids they loved and missed them, making it sound like I was the one keeping them apart. I called the school immediately and told them to refuse any future deliveries. They agreed, saying they would not allow any more packages from my parents. Then my brother reached out again. He told me our parents just missed the kids and asked if I could at least think about letting them see them. I told him exactly what I had told my son. Missing someone does not equal love. If they truly cared, they would have treated my children with love and respect from the beginning. Then came the biggest betrayal. I found out my sister had secretly allowed my parents to video call my kids. She had done it behind my back, telling them it was just a quick chat with Grandma and Grandpa. My son had been excited to talk to them, but my daughter had been confused, not understanding why she hadn't seen them in so long. My parents had acted as if nothing had happened, avoiding any mention of the past and pretending everything was normal. When I confronted my sister, she tried to justify it, saying she thought it would help and that she just wanted the kids to have a relationship with their grandparents. She didn't understand this wasn't about one conversation. It was about trust, about respect, about the fact that she had completely gone behind my back and overridden my decision as a parent. That was the final straw. I told her she had no right to make that choice, and from that moment forward, I was done with her too. Then my parents made one last attempt at manipulation. They invited my children to a surprise party through another family member. They were hoping my kids would be so excited about the idea that they would convince me to take them. They wanted to use my own children to get what they wanted. I refused. Then came another message, the same kind I had come to expect. They wrote, "We are not getting any younger. You should reconsider before it is too late." I ignored it. That night, my wife reminded me of something important. She told me that our children had all the love they needed right here with us, that they did not need to chase after validation from people who had never treated them as equals, that we were building something better, a home where our kids never had to wonder if they were loved. And she was right. For the first time, I was truly done. There was no going back. The guilt tripping didn't stop. My parents had moved on to a new tactic, telling anyone who would listen that my kids would grow up regretting not knowing their grandparents. They made themselves sound like the victims of a cruel and unnecessary estrangement, painting me as the unreasonable son keeping their innocent grandchildren away. Then I heard about the next family event. My brother was throwing a birthday party for his child, a big event with most of the extended family invited. My parents, of course, would be there. It wasn't surprising that my family wasn't included, but this time they made sure we knew about it. Instead of just ignoring us, they went out of their way to mention the party in conversations with mutual relatives, making sure the information got back to me. It worked, just not in the way they wanted. My eldest son heard about the party from a cousin at school. Confused, he came home and asked why they hadn't been invited. I kept my response simple, telling him that sometimes families have complicated relationships and that this was one of those situations. He nodded but looked disappointed, the reality of the divide settling in more and more. Then a cousin leaked a message that exposed my father completely. In a private chat, my father had written, "OP always acted like a victim, and his kids are probably just like him." That was it. That was how he saw my children. Not as innocent kids, not as grandchildren he loved, but as an extension of me, someone he had written off long ago. The message made its way through the family and reactions were split. Some relatives were disgusted. A few of them reached out saying they hadn't realized how deep the favoritism ran until now. Others tried to stay out of it, pretending like it wasn't their problem. Then I got a message from someone unexpected, my sister's husband. He told me privately that he completely agreed with me. He had seen the favoritism firsthand, had witnessed how differently my parents treated my kids compared to my siblings' children. He wished his wife would see it too, but she refused to acknowledge it. When my sister found out about our conversation, she was furious. Instead of considering what her husband was saying, she doubled down. She told me to stop making things worse and to just move on. She refused to believe our parents were in the wrong, no matter how much proof was in front of her. I was done. I told her there was nothing left to talk about. From that moment forward, I had no sister. Then my parents made one last manipulative move. They sent a long message, not to me, but to my wife. The message was filled with carefully worded apologies, vague regrets, and empty phrases about wanting to heal as a family. But the one thing it didn't include was any acknowledgement of the favoritism, any recognition of how they had treated my children. It was just another attempt to regain control without taking responsibility. My wife saw through it immediately. She deleted the message without responding. Then my mother's sister reached out. She had stayed quiet for a long time, but now she admitted something I had suspected all along. My mother had always played favorites, even when we were kids. She had made it clear who mattered more. My aunt regretted not speaking up sooner. She told me that no matter what, my wife and I were doing the right thing by protecting our children. Then the family group chat exploded. One of my cousins who had been on my side from the start dropped a collection of screenshots, messages from my parents to other relatives filled with manipulations, guilt-tripping, and outright lies. Suddenly, more people in the family started seeing the truth. Some extended relatives began cutting my parents off. A few of them stopped inviting my parents to events, tired of the drama and the way they treated people. That was when my parents played their final card. Through a relative, they let it slip that they had rewritten their will. I had been removed completely. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to react, to lash out, to beg them to reconsider. I didn't. Instead, I sent them one message. That is fine. My kids were never going to benefit from people who never saw them as real family anyway. They never responded. For the first time, it seemed to hit them. They had lost control. There was nothing left for them to hold over me. No guilt, no manipulation, no financial leverage. All they had left was their pride, and in the end, that was all they had chosen to keep. Months passed, and life without my parents felt lighter. There was no more stress, no more waiting for the next manipulative move, no more feeling like I had to justify protecting my kids. My wife and I focused on our home, our children, and the family we were building together. For the first time in a long time, there was peace. Then, through a cousin, I heard the inevitable. My parents were trying to reach out again. This time it was different. They weren't making demands or playing the victim. Instead, they were telling relatives that they just wanted to talk. But I knew better. Nothing had changed. They weren't reaching out because they had finally understood their mistakes. They were reaching out because they had lost control, and they hated it. I ignored it. Meanwhile, cracks started forming in the relationship between my brother and sister. For years, they had been the ones my parents favored, the ones who could do no wrong. But as time went on, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. My brother and sister were still close to my parents, but their bond with each other started to weaken. Then, something I never expected happened. My brother reached out to me. He admitted that he regretted how things had gone down. He acknowledged that our parents had always played favorites, that he saw it now in ways he hadn't before. He even apologized for dismissing me when I first brought it up. But even after all of that, he wasn't ready to cut them off. He said they were still his parents, and despite everything, he couldn't walk away. I thanked him for his honesty, but I kept my distance. I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship with someone who still wanted to stay attached to people who had treated my kids like they were nothing. Then I heard about how the will backfired. After my parents had removed me, they had turned their attention toward my brother and sister, trying to use money to keep them in line. But instead of feeling rewarded, my siblings started feeling controlled. My parents made it clear that their financial future depended on loyalty that meant agreeing with them no matter what, keeping the family image intact, and never questioning their decisions. The resentment grew. More extended relatives distanced themselves. My parents were no longer getting the invitations they once did. The very people they had worked so hard to impress were seeing them for who they really were. While their world got smaller, mine got better. My kids were thriving without the toxic family dynamic. They were growing up happy, loved, and free from the confusion of favoritism. There were no more moments of feeling like they weren't enough, no more questions about why their grandparents treated them differently. They had parents who valued them, who put them first, who never made them compete for love. Then karma did its work. The very children my parents had favored, my brother and sister, started seeing the truth. They began experiencing the same manipulation I had gone through for years. The money, the expectations, the guilt, it all started weighing on them. Slowly they realized that our parents' love had always come with conditions. Then my mother sent one final email. This time there was no pretending, no fake kindness, no desperate attempts at reconciliation. It was pure blame. She wrote that I had broken up the family and that I had ruined everything by walking away. I deleted it without responding, and just like that, it was over. Their world had shrunk to nothing. The relatives who once supported them had moved on. The loyalty they craved from my brother and sister was cracking, and I was free. That night I made sure there was no way for them to ever contact me again. I blocked their email, ensuring there was no more room for manipulation, no more desperate messages, no more guilt tripping. It was done. My wife and I sat together after the kids went to bed, talking about everything that had happened. Despite all the chaos, all the pain, all the stress, it had led us here, to a place where our family was safe, happy, and free from the weight of toxic people. And that was the real ending. Not the one my parents had wanted, but the one my family truly deserved. Looking back, I realized that standing up for my children taught me to finally stand up for myself. For too many years, I had accepted being treated as less important, less valued, less loved. I had normalized behavior that should never have been acceptable. My children deserved better, and so did I. The hardest lesson was accepting that some people will never change, that some relationships can't be saved, and that sometimes walking away is the only healthy choice. My parents will likely never acknowledge what they did or how deeply they hurt us. They'll continue to rewrite the narrative, to play the victims, to blame everyone but themselves. But that's no longer my burden to bear. What matters now is that my children are growing up in a home where they know they are loved unconditionally. They don't have to earn affection or compete for attention. They don't have to wonder why they weren't good enough for their grandparents. Instead, they're surrounded by people who truly value them. There are still moments of sadness when I think about what could have been. The relationship my parents could have had with my children if they had chosen love over control. But those moments grow fewer with time. In their place is a profound gratitude for the family we've built, the boundaries we've established, and the peace we've found. My story doesn't have the happy reconciliation that some might hope for. There was no dramatic moment where my parents realized their wrongs and begged for forgiveness. There was just a slow, painful acceptance that some people aren't capable of the love and respect that everyone deserves. And sometimes, that acceptance is its own kind of freedom. To anyone facing similar family dynamics, know that you're not alone. Know that it's okay to set boundaries, to protect your children, to demand better treatment. And most importantly, know that walking away from toxic relationships, even with family, can be an act of courage, not failure. Our family is smaller now, but it's healthier, and in the end, that's what truly matters.